Good evening. Welcome to this evening's debate between the candidates for District Attorney of Los Angeles. My name's John Cohn, and I oversee live programming and events for KPCC and LAist. Tonight, we are co-presenting an event with the Los Angeles Times. Our sincere thanks to all of the LA Times subscribers and KPCC LAist members joining us tonight. You help fund our journalism and make it possible for us to host community events just like this one. To learn more about LA Times virtual events or to become a subscriber, visit latimes.com/virtual events. To check out other KPCC and LAist voter game plan virtual events, voting resources, or to become a member, visit votergameplan.com or kpcc.org. Tonight's program is being live video streamed at laist.com, kpcc.org, and latimes.com. We invite you to engage with us and your fellow attendees in the chat. If you're on social, we invite you to engage using the hashtag #DADebate. The full video of this event will be available on all of our event pages, and the program will air on KPCC this Saturday at 2 p.m. Thank you again for joining us this evening. Now it's my pleasure to welcome your hosts and debate moderators, the Los Angeles Times' James Quealy and KPCC's Frank Stoltz.
Thank you, John. Good evening and welcome to tonight's hour-long debate between the candidates for LA District Attorney. I'm Frank Stoltz, criminal justice correspondent for KPCC. I'm joined by James Quealy, who covers criminal courts in the DA's office for the Los Angeles Times. KPCC and the Los Angeles Times are the co-sponsors of this event. Here's the format for the debate. One of us will ask a question of a candidate who will have 90 seconds to respond. Then the other candidate will each have 90 seconds to reply. After that, we'll have 2 minutes of additional discussion. Then we'll move on to the next question, alternating between the candidates. Some questions will be for both candidates, others will be specific to one or the other. One more thing, in the weeks leading up to the debate, we asked people in the community to suggest questions we could ask the candidates, and they have informed many of the questions we'll ask tonight. Now, please welcome the two candidates, Incumbent District Attorney Jackie Lacey and Challenger George Gascón. I think I hear clapping in the background somewhere. Now, a little more on the candidates. DA Jackie Lacey is a career prosecutor. She grew up in the Crenshaw district, went to USC's law school, and joined the DA's office in 1986. Over the years, she rose through the ranks, trying dozens of cases, leading the major crimes and major narcotics units, and finally becoming Chief Deputy DA. Voters elected Lacey DA in 2012. In 2016, she ran for re-election unopposed.
Her opponent, George Gascón, emigrated to the U.S. from Cuba and is a veteran of both the U.S. Army and the Los Angeles Police Department. He joined the LAPD in 1978 and spent more than 2 decades on the job, rising to the rank of assistant chief. He later served as a police chief in Mesa, Arizona, and San Francisco before being appointed as San Francisco's district attorney in 2011. Gascón was elected to that post later that year and re-elected in 2015. He stepped down last fall to run for DA here in Los Angeles. So let's get started. Voters are being asked to choose between 2 different approaches to criminal justice, but also 2 different resumes. DA Lacey has been a prosecutor for over 30 years and likes to note that her opponent has never tried a case. Mr. Gascón also spent more than 30 years as a law enforcement officer before serving almost 9 years as the DA in San Francisco. Can you both explain how your legal backgrounds do or do not impact the day-to-day running of a district attorney's office? We will start in the order that the candidates appear on the ballot, so DA Lacey, you may respond first. You have 90 seconds.
Ms. Lacey, I think you're muted.
You're muted, DA Lacey.
Thank you, sorry about that. I wanted to correct one thing you said about me, Frank. I did not head the major crimes unit. I was the director or over major crimes, but not the head of the unit. Here's why I think it's important to choose someone who has experience in trying cases. So I've tried 100 jury trials, both misdemeanor and felonies. And there's nothing like trying a case. You understand the nuances of the law, of the witnesses, and how jurors think, and what you need in order to prove cases, the mechanics of it. As the top prosecutor in the office, oftentimes I have to make decisions about very important cases. And so I need to know what questions to ask the trial lawyer to make sure that we have the right type of evidence, enough evidence in order to try the case. I also think that trying cases sharpens your legal skills. You learn the law a lot of times, evidence, and those things by actually employing those things in a jury trial. And so with the LA County District Attorney's Office, we file probably 120,000 cases a year. You need to have been in the courtroom. It is a law firm. It is a law firm of litigators, and that
15 seconds.
And that's really important if you're going to lead them. The lawyers have to know that you know how to try a case.
Mr. Gascón, you have 90 seconds to respond.
You know, Ms. Lacey has been a faithful steward of the past. There is no question that she grew up in the LA DA's office. She was a trial lawyer, and she grew up in this culture that value trials over anything else. The same culture has led to many wrongful convictions, and the culture that has led to the levels of discrimination and disproportionality that we have today. Unquestionably, she is a capable trial lawyer. The question that we have to ask ourselves is, are we hiring a trial lawyer, or are we hiring someone that will be capable of taking this office into the 21st century? If you look at my resume, you will see one of a long history of running large organizations successfully and reducing crime. Interestingly enough, during Ms. Lacey's stewardship, we have seen crime go up in LA County, 27% in LA County, and nearly 50% in the city of LA. I'm talking about violent crime. Everywhere that I've worked, crime has been reduced. Violent crime in San Francisco went down per capita during the same period that we were both district attorneys. When it comes to running large organizations, my resume is far superior
15
to
seconds.
Ms. Lacey. Unquestionably, if we were hiring a trial lawyer to continue to do business in the LADA as we've done in the past, Ms. Lacey would be extremely qualified. I don't believe that that is a vision for the future.
Time.
Ms. Lacey, do you have any rebuttal to Mr. Gascón's remarks?
Well, yes, I do. You know, it is interesting to me, the crime stats that he threw around. San Francisco has the highest property crime rate per capita in the nation. And in the time he was there, he did nothing about it. It seems to me that if he had had some litigation experience, he would have known you've got to get involved with the police officers early on to address stuff like that. He also, James, said that violent crime didn't go up in San Francisco. First of all, I would give credit to the San Francisco Police Department for that, but actually it did go up ever so slightly in San Francisco, so that's not exactly accurate. The truth of the matter is the FBI statistics show that you're actually safer from violent crime in Los Angeles County if you look at crime per capita than you are in San Francisco. San Francisco is not the same place that it used to be. Businesses are drying up, people are afraid, and it is in no small part due to the fact that Mr. Gascón just is refusing.
DA Lacey, that's you've reached your 60 seconds. I would like to clarify, and Mr. Gascón, maybe you can answer this question or follow up for your minute. How is DA Lacey responsible for the violent crime stats you are alleging in Los Angeles, considering most of that is driven by an error, you know, the LAPD misclassifying aggravated assaults? How is that exactly DA Lacey's fault?
Well, I think it's interesting because Ms. Lacey said that had I had trial experience, crime would have gone down in San Francisco. Interestingly enough, the vast majority of the property crime in San Francisco during the period that went up, it was 81,000 car break-ins. There were 13 arrests. It's very hard for a prosecutor to have an impact on crime if the police is not making an arrest. Interestingly enough, the last 2 years of our administration, we had new leadership in the SFPD, and we saw a reduction of about 20% in property crime as the police and my office worked together. But if the case is that because of the lack of experience in trial cases, it's interesting to point out that the increase in assaults, in aggravated assaults in the county is beyond the miscounting of the LAPD. The reality is we have seen an increase in crime.
15 seconds,
beyond that.
Mr. Gascón.
The problem that we have is that we are not hiring someone that was a trial lawyer back in the 80s and 90s and continues to want to do business as if we did in the 80s and 90s.
All right, that's
We're
time,
going
Mr.
into the
Gascón.
21st century.
Let's move on to the next question. In some ways, the criminal justice system has been placed on trial this year. How would each of you address the issue of inherent racism in the system and restore lost trust? Mr. Gascón, if you would start, you have 90 seconds.
Yeah, if you look at my history, one of the things that we did in San Francisco when I became the district attorney, we were very focused in doing two things: in ensuring that we had public safety and that we reduce incarceration. Because one of the things that we knew, and I knew personally, was that incarceration in this country usually is primarily visited upon Black and brown communities. We, within a year, reduced our jail population to an average of about 27% daily without having an impact on crime. I then was one of the co-authors of Prop 47. Prop 47 has been credited with being one of the largest decarcerator of Black and brown men in the state. And at the same time, we have plenty of data to show that crime has gone down since Prop 47, including property crime. The reality is that if you look at my path, my work, you will see that has been very focused on achieving safety and reducing incarceration and reforming the system. My opponent in this case has opposed every single reform that has come her way. She called realignment the worst thing that could have happened. She was against the reform of 3 strikes.
15 seconds,
She was
Mr.
against
Gascón.
Prop 47. She was against all the other reforms that we've had. It is very hard to be a reformer when you do not believe in reform.
D.A. Lacey?
George, I have no idea where you're getting your information from. And I just want to set the record straight. You're more likely, if you're Black, to be arrested in San Francisco than you are in LA County. Your arrest and prosecution rates for African Americans was 8 times what it was in LA. And in LA, we have 9% African Americans, you had 5%. 40% of the people arrested in San Francisco and prosecuted by you were Black. And there is no excuse for that. That said, with regard to Prop 47, property crime has gone up 49% since Prop 47 passed. How do you explain that? Especially when you look at throughout the United States, violent crime has gone down and property crime has gone down or stayed the same. And yet after the passage of Prop 47, it went up. Prop 47 was right in terms of drugs, because I think the country was moving away from incarcerating those who were drugs. But what about the chronic theft that happened? What about those businesses, those mom and pop businesses that dried up and left because of the chronic theft? You could steal over and over again. And I hope you come back to this Prop 47 question, gentlemen, because we had a discussion when George first proposed this. And
15 seconds, Ms. Lacey.
That there were things that we needed to tweak in order to make this work. And there we sat at a Starbucks and he closed the file and just left saying, it's going to pass without you and too bad, so sad. So I just don't know where those things are. I supported third strike.
Time is up.
Third strike reform.
Yeah, we are going to get to Prop 47 and raise some questions about the statistics that you just delivered about increases in property crime, because there are several studies that don't back that up. And I want Mr. Gascón to respond to the higher rate of arrest and prosecution of African Americans in San Francisco. But before that, D.A. Lacey, let me repeat the question for you, because I didn't hear an answer. How would you address issues of inherent racism in the system and restore lost trust? Clearly, there's a crisis of confidence in both policing and prosecution.
Frank, I think we've already started doing that. We started with anti-bias training for everybody in our office. I have a diverse staff. I have African Americans, Latino, Asian on my executive team. I don't believe the DA of San Francisco has ever had an African-American on his executive team. And so you have to bring diverse voices at the table. I think there is a lot of work to do. I understand why people don't trust the system and don't trust the police. And I think that with regard to DAs, with regard to prosecutors, we do have to be more open about transparent about what goes on in the office. But I do think that there needs to be more community policing. People have to get out of their cars as police officers and get to know people in the neighborhood.
15
People need
seconds.
to understand what the community more and what the criminal justice system is about. But I think having diverse people at the table, looking at policies, getting rid of those that have an inherent bias toward people of color is the way to go.
Mr. Gascón, what about DA Lacey's charge of higher arrest and prosecution rates of African-Americans in San Francisco?
Well, I think the problem is there's so much inaccuracy in what Ms. Lacey's talking. Before we go anywhere, we did have a meeting because I wanted her to support Prop 47. And her first comment was, how would I deal with my white Republican voters in the Valley if I were to support this?
That is simply not true, and you know.
But also, interestingly enough, when Ms. Lacey talks about the lack of diversity in my office, actually, Stanford Law School did an analysis in 2016 of diversity in DA's offices around the state, and San Francisco was deemed to be the most diverse of any large office. And actually, in my executive staff, there was a male African-American, a female Asian, and a female Latina. And that was the executive staff that I had during my entire time in the office. As to the issue of disproportionality, if you look at Prop 47, which I was one of the co-authors, has been credited with being one of the biggest reducers of African-American incarceration in the history of the state. I challenge you to look at those numbers because they're important and they had a tremendous impact in our work in San Francisco. Now, there is no question that there is
Mr.
disproportionality.
Gascón, your time is up, Mr. Gascón.
Okay.
We're going to move on to the next question, if that's okay with everybody. The use of gang sentencing enhancements has been called into question amidst increasing concern about unreliable information from police leading to defendants being wrongly labeled as gang members. We've seen this issue raised time and again within the LAPD, from the Cal Gang audit a few years ago that found inaccurate information was being put into the state database, to the more recent scandal involving LAPD Metro officers allegedly falsifying the gang status of people they arrested. Will either of you commit to ending the use of gang sentencing enhancements? Why or why not? DA Lacey, you have 90 seconds.
50% of the homicides committed in Los Angeles are for the benefit of a gang. And so I would not eliminate the gang enhancement. The other thing that the gang enhancement does is, believe it or not, a drive-by shooting is not a serious or violent felony. Neither is witness intimidation. By charging a gang enhancement, those things do become a serious and violent felony. And if you're part of a gang and you're doing drive-by shootings and you're also intimidating witnesses, you should be punished. The Cal Gang scandal it's important to put it in its context. We are not using Cal Gang's data to prove a gang enhancement. There are other ways that we have been using to prove this gang enhancement. And I want to note that when we find a problem, and we did find a problem with some officers on the FI cards, we're currently prosecuting them, and we do that, we address that. But in general, you need that in Los Angeles. You have a gang problem, and I want to point out that in San Francisco, Mr. Gascón did in fact use the gang enhancement on several of his gang cases. And so to now say, and I know he's publicly saying he's not going to ever charge the gang enhancement, he did in San Francisco.
15 seconds.
I believe, Mr. Gascón, you have 90 seconds to respond.
Thank you,
Yes,
James.
the difference between Ms. Lacey and I is that I continue to learn and evolve. When I became uneasy with, with the use of enhancements, we brought in the Stanford Law School to do an analysis of the impact of enhancements in our work. And we began to change our practice according to that. And that is correct. I have committed not to use gang enhancements if I were elected district attorney, just as I did towards the end of my time while I was in the SFPD, but because we know that gang enhancements actually are corrupted because of the information that comes in. In fact, I find it very interesting that Ms. Lacey talks about holding people accountable when, according to the LA Times, one of the officers that is now being looked upon and prosecuted for falsifying FI cards was deemed to be providing false testimony in 2015 in cases handled by Ms. Lacey's office. And this is according to the LA Times. And yet he continued to provide testimony, continued to make arrests for the following 5 years. And it really wasn't until there was a scandal. And I personally was the first one to come out and challenge Ms. Lacey to stop using the cow gangs and use this information. And it took her a long time to react. We know that in this county, it's not just the LAPD that has been falsifying some of those records concerning primarily Black and brown kids, whether they're in gangs or not. There are cases involving the sheriff department, there are cases involving other agencies that she knows they haven't been made public and she hasn't taken action on. But again, Officer Shaw was deemed to be a liar in 2015.
DA Lacey, I imagine you have a response there, especially since your office is very involved in the case in question Mr. Gascón is making allegations about. So I guess you have 1 minute if you'd like to address that.
Right. Mr. Gascón is incorrect as usual. With regard to Officer Shaw, it wasn't an FI card scandal that was uncovered. It was something else. And we dealt with that, put that in the Brady alert system. Here's the deal. He wants to leave residents helpless. He keeps saying, I don't want to enforce the gang enhancement without presenting evidence that it's not there. And that's because that there's a big scandal. And that's because he is not a courtroom lawyer. And so he doesn't understand day in and day out how our office challenges gang members, how they try the cases. And more importantly, the victims. The victims are people of color. The gangs have neighborhoods under siege. And this was something that was approved by the voters. And so Mr. Gascón thinks he's smarter than the voters and he wants to come in, throw out the penal code, do what he wants to do based on research from someone else. Here's what I want to say about
I believe that's time.
That's time.
DA Lacey.
Yeah, sorry, but my apologies. That was my time call. Ms. Lacey, could I just ask a quick follow-up? My sense is that you think that there's the problem with the FI cards and the LAPD's Metro Division were a one-off. But the Little Hoover Commission, numerous studies, and certainly many, many activists and people within law enforcement even say that this system of misidentifying young men and women, mostly young men of color, as gang members is a problem that's deep-seated in the criminal justice system. So I think the question is, what do you do about that?
Well, one of the things that you do, and it's not that I think it's isolated. I think that what Mr. Gascón has said is, oh, it's ridiculous. You can't rely on it. I think what you do is you trust but verify. In other words, you go through, you verify what the officer says. Body camera evidence. We didn't have that before. We now have that. As a matter of fact, it was LAPD that actually investigated this and found out by looking at the body camera evidence. As a prosecutor, you check, you double check, you look for tattoos, you look for videotape, audio tape of self-admission. So there are many ways, Frank, that you can verify this. It is not just a matter of the officer says so. There has to be evidence of proof. And when we get to
seconds.
The jurors are the ones who make the decision about the gang enhancement, Frank, and they look for evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that the gang enhancement is there.
Based on what prosecutors tell them, mostly.
No, based on what the witnesses say. That's not fair. That's not fair. It's what the witnesses say, Frank.
We've hit time.
Yeah.
Frank, should we move on, or
yeah, unless
skip over a rebuttal there?
Yeah, are we fair? You feel okay there, Mr. Gascón? I suppose we should.
Yeah, I think we can.
If you want to make okay.
No, let's move on.
DA Lacey, during your 8 years in office, you have prosecuted just one police officer among more than 600 who were involved in a shooting. Mr. Gascón, you didn't prosecute any officers involved in a shooting during your almost 9-year tenure. So please explain to voters, given your records, why they should trust you to hold police accountable when they use fatal force unjustly. So Mr. Gascón, why don't you begin? You have 90 seconds to respond.
Yes, I think that there's a reality that there have been problems with the law. And unlike Ms. Lacey, who's had at least, according to her own account, 12 killings of unarmed men, all people of color, I never had one of those. All the cases that we had police killings that were presented to me were armed suspects. But even in those cases, I recognize that some of those killings were unnecessary. And I went out publicly and said so. I said, this is a lawful shooting, but it was unnecessary. And then I challenged the state legislators to do something about it. And then I worked with state legislators and we got law passed. Interestingly enough, I contacted every other district attorney in the state, including Ms. Lacey, which we have letters to document that, asked her to join me, because I believe that it was something that we as prosecutors should do together. No one else joined. Ms. Lacey was comfortable. In fact, she complained about the law. She continues to find it that it's okay for police to unnecessarily kill people, unarmed people. Perhaps she feels that's fine, or perhaps it's all the money that she continues to take from police unions that has conflicted her to the point that she cannot take these cases. In fact, recently she had a case that I call out that was involving the daughter of one of the PPL leaders who got $1 million for her. And I said, you have to conflict yourself out. And finally, the AG told her, you are conflicted out of this case. So the problem is, it's not the prosecutor or not prosecuting. It's what has she done about it and what have I done about it? And they're very different cases.
DA Lacey, your response.
Desmond Rogers, Peter O'Neill, and there are several other cases where the people were not armed in San Francisco and this man didn't prosecute him. I don't know what he's talking about when he says that he talked to me about a conflict. Our LA County District Attorney's Office has run quite well. We have a system where these cases come in, we review them. And the big question, Frank, that you asked, which he never answered, which is why there have been a lack of shootings, a lack of prosecutions. Part of it is the law, the evidence, and the facts. And it's interesting that he is coming down to this jurisdiction after never prosecuting any of these cases. In fact, his office was so inexperienced under his leadership in prosecuting excessive force cases, they actually asked for our advice on this stuff. And so he's not telling the voters the truth. He is snookering the activists and telling them, hey, I'm your man, don't worry, I'm gonna prosecute these cases, when he didn't do it in San Francisco. He has yet to really offer any concrete advice, any concrete thing that he says he's going to do
15 seconds.
with regard to the police shootings. My answer is training, that we've got to train them. And yes, we've got to hold them accountable. I've held over 200 officers accountable for violating the law, both on and off duty. He cannot match that record.
It's time, Ms. Lacey. Mr. Gascón, I would like to ask a follow-up question. The DA has a point. We did kind of sidestep that question a little bit. You have talked about the law before being an obstacle to your ability to prosecute in those cases. For argument's sake, cases that you passed on that gained a lot of controversy up there, like the Mario Woods case, Luis Gongora Pat, Amilcar Perez Lopez, under the new law, would you have been able to prosecute those cases? If so, why or why not?
Yeah, unless it's important to say that all of those three cases were men, they had knives, they were armed. In fact, Mario Woods had stabbed someone before he was killed. But I made it very clear in the Mario Woods case and on the Gongora cases, those were unnecessary shootings. The reality is that Ms. Lacey's lying. She knows that the O'Neill case was not finished. The investigation was not finished when I left. And she knows that there's no one that was killed, unarmed person that was killed, a case that was presented to me during my time as district attorney. The other fact that she knows is that proportionally, I prosecuted many more cases. We prosecuted over 30 officers in San Francisco for a variety of offenses, including 6 for use of force. If you were to extrapolate that, she would have to have prosecuted nearly 70 people for force and almost 400 for other crimes. So she is, again, being misleading, but be as it may, the facts are what they are. I have the only prosecutor that have lobby aggressively to change the law.
Time, Mr. Gascón.
Yeah,
DA, I don't have a specific follow. Frank, go ahead. Sorry. If you have a
I do.
specific
Yeah,
follow-up.
let me just, I'm curious. The law very much favors police officers and the evaluation of these cases. You know, the new state law may loosen that up a little bit. But my question to you, D.A. Lacey, is do you wish that you could have prosecuted more officers if the law were different? That the law, do you wish that the law were different so that you could have prosecuted more officers over the years in some of these cases?
Yeah, there are some cases where it was extremely close. And I thought that the tactics used were wrong, or that it was close. And there are cases, and I have met with family members who have lost people or lost loved ones, and I just know that you know, it's painful. It is painful, and there does need to be change. One thing I was going to say, Frank, I don't think Mr. Gascón answered your question about Mario Woods, whether it would be prosecuted under the new law. That's a simple question. He helped to draft the law. So what's the answer to that? And that's where his inexperience as a trial lawyer shows, because he should be able to tell you or answer that question. You got the law change. You know, we all decline cases where we feel bad, we wish we could deliver something.
15 seconds.
But it just is so disingenuous to say, look, I couldn't do it, but it wasn't necessary. So what? That's not giving the family justice.
DA Lacey, that's time. We're going to move on in 1 second, but Mr. Gascón, I would like you to answer the DA's question. Mario Woods, under the new standard of 392, would you have charged that case or not? Just yes or no?
Yeah, the answer is yes, but more importantly,
Yes or no, Mr. Gascón, we have to move on.
It is a yes. It is a yes.
All right. Next question. Numerous studies have shown the application of the death penalty in the U.S. disproportionately affects communities of color. Mr. Gascón, you've said if elected, you would seek to resentence defendants in cases where the LADA's office has won death penalty convictions. DA Lacey, you still support the death penalty, though you have noted repeatedly you only seek capital punishment in a small fraction of cases. I believe the figure is 2%. Can you both please explain how, if elected, you would navigate the use of the death penalty and attempt to mitigate its potentially disparate effect on people of color? DA Lacey, you have 90 seconds.
Yes, as I've said before, it should really only be used in the rarest of cases. In our office and under my leadership, we have done that. We have only sought it in rare cases, cases like the Gabriel Fernandez case, and then the Grim Sleeper, which the decision was made before I became DA. But it's those type of cases: serial killers, baby torturers, people of that nature. Notwithstanding, we are aware that with regard to crime, that most of the people who we prosecute happen to be people of color. We live in a community of color, unlike San Francisco, where the majority of people are not people of color. We live in a community where I think it's something like 78% of the people are people of color. That said, it's about the cases, it's about the victims, it's about the brutality of the crime. That's what it's about. And until the voters tell me they don't want this penalty anymore, we're going to continue to seek it, but seek it in very rare cases.
Mr. Gascón, your response?
Yes, I never pursued the death penalty as a DA in San Francisco. I campaigned against the death penalty in 2012. And I have pledged not to use the death penalty if I was elected DA. But interestingly enough, my opponent continues to say that only in the rarest of cases, but she sent 23 people to death row during her administration. And unlike what she's saying, actually San Francisco is a minority majority. Over 50% of the people in San Francisco are people of API community, Latinos, or African-Americans. But I understand that she's demographically challenged. The reality is that the death penalty has lost its utility a very long time ago. And when you look at the application along with the death penalty in this county, and you see how discriminatory has been, and you understand the national figures that tells you that if the victim is white and the assailant is black, that is the greatest likelihood that someone is going to be prosecuted for the death penalty. You look at the work that continues to happen in this office, and you look at the fact that this doesn't make us any safer. In fact, if you look at the violent crime rates in the city, I would
15
say
seconds.
Ms. Lacey is out of touch with reality, and her rhetoric doesn't match her actions.
Okay, we're going to move on unless somebody has a specific response to the other.
No, the only thing I want to remind people is in 2011, when he first got appointed DA, he raised all these issues that he's talking about. He said it was an imperfect tool, everything he just said here. But back then, he did say the following, that he would seek it in crimes that are so heinous and so evil per se that the death penalty may be warranted. The difference is that now he's gotten very political. He says evolved. That's politics, changing your views, changing your state in order to get a new job, in order to get elected. And I am not that person. I'm going to enforce the laws as they stand, but do it in a fair and even-handed manner.
Just 15 seconds, Mr. Gascón, if you want, we'll move on.
I campaigned against the death penalty. I was a spokesperson for Prop 34 in 2012. Never thought the death penalty. The reality is that Ms. Lacey is just simply misstating the facts.
Okay, pretty clear. Ms. Lacey supports the death penalty. Mr. Gascón opposes it. Ms. Lacey, this question is solely for you. You have opposed virtually every recent measure on the ballot to roll back penalties for non-violent offenses, including Propositions 47, 57, and 62, which legalize marijuana. And all of these measures were overwhelmingly approved by LA County voters. In addition, voters have twice supported statewide measures to abolish the death penalty. Yet you steadfastly continue to support capital punishment. We just heard that. Explain to voters how you're in touch with them, given you've opposed them in no less than 4 major issues of the day. So 90 seconds, please.
Well, so being a lawyer, Frank, I read a lot of these propositions. We've got a lot of things that are coming up on the ballot that people will vote for because they have a certain title: safety and justice, save our schools, that sorts of things. But when you look at them, when you look closely at them and read them, which I do, you find the gaps, you find the loopholes. So with regard to Prop 47, as I mentioned, there's chronic theft. Property crime has gone up throughout the state. It has gone up in San Francisco by 49% while George Gascón has been there. And so that was something that could have been fixed by a very smart architect at the time. Prop 57, we sat down with the governor, several DAs, and said, you know what, sex offenders are going to get out early. Governor, can't you fix that the way this is written? He disagreed. It got passed. And guess what? The sex offender community sued. And it turns out it does apply. So now certain sex offenders are getting out. With marijuana, you know, who's complaining the most about the passage of that law right now is those who are in the legal business. That's because it really didn't do anything to help get rid of the illegal market, the illicit market. As a matter of fact, in LA, there's an issue right now with what's called social equity partners. And these are Black people and brown people being taken advantage of by unscrupulous investors when they thought they were going to get into business for themselves, but in reality, they're getting into some oppressive contracts. So these things could have been fixed if, in fact, they
DA, your time is up. I would like to ask a very quick follow-up question since you brought up cannabis, which I briefly was writing about for about 6 months back in the day. A lot of the problems in LA with unlicensed, contributors, with what you brought up, the social equity programs, those are really issues that most people put the blame on the Department of Cannabis Regulation in the city and our other more administrative issues, the LAPD and DWP not doing shutdowns fast enough. How is that the fault of Prop 62?
Because I think, James, they could have addressed it. In other words, they knew that law enforcement wasn't going to be able to enforce those laws. When that law was drafted, there should have been some provision for a robust enforcement at the state level. in order to fill the gap. They knew, and they didn't really want to do that. They didn't really want to write that into the law. So they should have done that, and they didn't. With the social equity folks, remember that with regard to legalization of marijuana, it was supposed to really help those people of color who had prior convictions, which, you know, we just dismissed 66,000 marijuana convictions, which is a help. But the social equity partners, they're not being helped. And it seems like that could have been written into the state law so that there would have been the opportunity for those who were most disproportionately affected by the war on drugs would be able to get into the cannabis business for themselves. It's just simply not working and not happening.
We're going to switch over to a question from Mr. Gascón, but just so I'm clear, you're saying the voters were wrong on 47, the voters were wrong on 57, the voters were wrong on 62, the voters in LA County are wrong on the death penalty.
No, what I'm saying is the laws as written, Frank, and let's separate out the death penalty, the laws as written on 47, 57, and 62, the marijuana cannabis law, could have been better drafted to help the people it should. Like, for instance, with 47, there should have been, you know, so that's what I'm saying is they were not well drafted. It's not that I didn't oppose not having drug use go to a misdemeanor. Sure. It's not that I didn't oppose or was opposed to people getting out early. It's, could we just think about the community as well as what we're trying to do? And I just don't think they weren't well drafted. And the proof is just looking around at how this enforcement is, or how these laws are playing out right now.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Gascón, this question is for you. We're going to revisit this ground again. The property crime rate, and just so we're clear on the numbers, I'm talking about the rate, not the raw number, exploded in San Francisco under your term as DA. The rate jumped by 37% from 2011 to 2019. And as the DA has pointed out, the raw number of property crime incidents went up almost 50%. That's all per California Department of Justice data. This was driven by an unprecedented surge in thefts from motor vehicles, and a study by the Public Policy Institute of California in 2018 did blame Prop 47 for property crime, specifically those auto burglaries rising. Why should voters think those same results from San Francisco would not happen in LA County if you were elected? You have 90 seconds.
Yeah, sure. So look, the vast majority of the burglary from vehicles that are occurring in San Francisco, the vast majority of the property crimes were car burglaries, as you indicated, James. There were approximately 81,000 cases in a period of about 4 years. There were 13 arrests. It is hard for a prosecutor to play a role if arrests are not made. Interestingly enough, new leadership came in about 2 years ago, 3 years ago now. Completely different way of handling business. We saw auto burglaries and property crime start coming down within 18 months by nearly 20%. The reality that leadership in policing matters, and prosecutors have to play their role. Also, I think it's true. The Public Policy Institute found some correlation in property crimes, primarily driven by car burglaries, which San Francisco was leading. But they also found that it was very minor, and there are studies that show that property crime is less today that has been reduced since before Prop 47. We also have the UCI study that actually showed that Prop 47 had no impact on crime one way or the other. My opponent is really a revisionist. You know, she has opposed every one of these measures. And now she says, well, if I had a chance to rewrite it, if I did, we did meet. I was hoping to have her come to
15 seconds.
Prop 47, and she's forgetting now, but one of the concerns that she had, and she uses terms, how would I explain this to my white Republican constituents in the Valley, males, if I were to support this type of reform? That is a fact.
That's time, Mr. Gascón. I do have a quick follow-up question on this issue. Your office, at least from what I can see in your DA stat stuff online, only filed about 40% of all misdemeanors presented to your office during your time. A lot of the officers complained that they basically, you know, those arrest numbers that you cited are correct, but that they were discouraged from making arrests because they were fearful your office would never prosecute, and it kind of created a cycle that drove the crime. Can you respond to those criticisms? 1 minute.
Yeah, no, of course. Number one, let's remember that car burglaries are felonies, they're not misdemeanors, so we filed about 85% of those. But with misdemeanors, we have very aggressive diversion measures. We had neighborhood court. We have Make It Right, with this completely restorative justice model. We work with our community. We work with our nonprofit organization. In fact, I can tell you a case that I remember where we had a young woman that had been engaging in theft from her employer. Her employer was a big box company. She was a college student. The dollar amount could have led her to a prosecution for a felony to destroy her career. We brought her to our neighborhood courts, which is a neighborhood-based resolution. We were able to get her to fix her problem. We were able to eventually get her to pay without giving her a
15
criminal
seconds.
record. This is about bringing humanity to our work, understanding that discretion can be used for the better of our community, and that's what we did. We diverted a lot of people in San Francisco, and I'm very proud of the fact that we did.
That's time. Should we move on to the next one?
I believe
I'd
so.
like to respond. I'd like to respond just briefly. You know, that is important, James, what you just said, that they file only 40% of the misdemeanors. In LA, it's 86%, and we do robust diversion. But also with regard to the felonies, they were filing a little less than 50% of the felonies presented in their office. And the police were getting discouraged because they knew that he wasn't going to enforce the law. Look, I've had my car stolen when I was a student at USC going to college. It is devastating to have that happen. And you at least want to know that if they catch the person, that they have a DA that it would at least file charges, at least.
You know,
and
we're
he was
going to,
very reluctant to do that.
thank you. We're going to get into diversion. And let me encourage you both to talk about your ideas and where you would go on this, as opposed to saying where the other one didn't go or did go or should have gone. So both of you have embraced diversion programs as alternatives to jail for nonviolent and mentally ill people. But both of you have also faced criticism. Ms. Lacey, many on the defense bar say your diversion programs are only accessible to a small number of defendants. Mr. Gascón, police in San Francisco claim yours were too generous, removing the threat of prosecution, leading to spikes in crime. So if elected, how will you each expand alternative sentencing programs, which I think both of you want to do, while preserving public safety? We begin with DA Lacey. You have 90 seconds.
Yeah, so I hear that complaint, and every time I hear it, I say, okay, give me the case. Show me where the person should have been diverted. Diversion for mental health was not happening until we implemented. And people say it's a small percentage, but really like 4,000, tell that to almost 4,000 folks who have gotten mental health diversion, who've gotten housing, who've gotten other things, services that they've never had. The issue is, Frank, is you do have to be careful with who you divert, because some of the cases we get are people who have hurt one another, who've hurt somebody, who stabbed somebody. And we want to make sure that when we do divert people, that they're diverted to the right kind of setting. I think, for instance, the way we can divert more people, Frank, is if we have secure settings. There simply is a shortage and a waiting list for people to get into mental health diversion placement areas. And that has been the biggest impediment to us quickly getting people up and diverted. That said, I've advocated for more mental health care, for more money to go toward full supportive housing, for more resources. And I'm the first DA that has a policy that permits diversion.
15 seconds, DA Lacey.
Diversion. And so I think the big issue is we've got to have safe places to divert people to.
Mr. Gascón.
Yes, the reality is that we did diversion in San Francisco, and we did it very well. We use our neighborhood courts. The example that I brought up earlier of the young women that we were able to divert, we use Make It Right, which is a completely restorative justice model, where we have many cases, including, and they're juvenile, so the names I cannot mention, but involving a series of serious crimes that we were able to bring him back. This young man was having mental health problems. We were able to restore him back into the community without giving him a criminal record, something that here in LA seldom occurs. I also brought together people, and the LEAD program, which is a law enforcement assisted diversion program, really that started in Seattle. I was the one that prompted that to be brought over to California, which LA County is using, and I'm glad that they are. I put together with experts a behavioral health justice center concept, and my only failure there, and I will readily admit, I took it to our political base to try to pass it into law. We should have gone straight to the borders. Diversion works when it's done well. There is no question that we need more resources for diversion, but the difference between Ms. Lacey and I is that I follow what I say. She has a tendency to talk about things, but when you look at the implementation, it's not there, including her mental health diversion program, which we all know less than 300 people in the county have been diverted since that program started in a county of 10 million people. It's not George Gascón saying it. It's defense lawyers, it's judges. Usually when people get diverted here, they get diverted in spite of the
Mr.
DA.
Gascón. DA, I would like you to respond, but specifically a follow-up question, because I was a little confused by some of the stats you were citing. I asked your office for information on these programs earlier in the year. The 4,000 figure that I believe you cited actually has to do with all of the alternative sentencing courts in the county since 2014, which, as you know, is a very small percentage of the overall cases filed. And the mental health program, at least from last year to as of February of this year, I believe, again, this is your office's stats provided to me, only 217 of those petitions were granted, which was less than half. So if you could just clarify the data you were talking about before.
Right. So LA County has been involved in there's several different places along the spectrum you can be diverted, okay? So the numbers that you're talking about is with the new law called 1810, and that's called pretrial diversion. That just came into a law in effect recently. So those numbers are different. That is when the court diverts and we recommend diversion. But when I use diversion, I use it in the broader sense, James, and I think that's what the confusion is. In the broader sense, for instance, we have used the Office of Diversion and Reentry in order to divert people into full supportive housing. And when I say divert from prison, divert from jail, divert into these programs. And so diversion can occur at the pretrial stage, but it can also occur at the sentencing stage and anywhere along the process. And I think that is what the confusion is. Mr. Gascón is very late to the party. I've never seen him at any statewide committee, any sort of areas where
time's up, D.A. Lacey, but thank you. Frank, to follow up or rebuttal for Mr. Gascón?
Yeah, well, I imagine others might be feeling this frustration. First, just Ms. Lacey, briefly, I mean, you're suggesting that there's not one case that could have been diverted. I think you said, show me one person that could have been safely diverted, that wasn't.
Right. No, what I'm saying, I'm sorry, Frank. What I'm saying is oftentimes when you look at the facts and circumstances from the person who is asking for a diversion, if there's a reason we're opposing it, it's because of public safety reasons.
Okay, sure. So you're rejecting the RAND study and studies that say,
no,
hey,
I'm not.
a lot more people could have been diverted.
No, I've read the RAND study.
Okay.
We need more secure settings to divert people. And that's the import of the RAND study. I do not believe that a lot of the people we could just release out into the streets because I think they would be a danger to the public. But if we had safe places, if we really invested in mental health care, then I think we would be able to divert more people.
You're talking about locked mental health facilities.
Some locked facilities, some less than locked, but they've got to be secure. Otherwise, people will walk off, and they have walked off. And I just want to say once again, I'm very, very involved in the mental health movement statewide. Not seeing Mr. Gascón there. I feel like he came late to the party.
We heard that. Let's get a response from him on that. Thank you.
Look, the reality is that, again, Ms. Lacey's rhetoric and her actions are different. The RAND Corporation was right, just as many judges and many defense lawyers are right. And I'm getting this from very many people. Getting mental health diversion in this county with the support of the district attorney is almost impossible. You mentioned the numbers. I said 300, I was being generous, less than 300. A county of nearly 10.5 million people. Facts are what the facts are. There is nothing else. I understand that my opponent wants to continue to revisit history and rewrite history, but we should not allow her to do so.
Thank you. We are moving on to the next question. And the next question is
I guess,
finance.
Okay.
Ms. Lacey. Police unions, including those that represent LAPD officers, sheriff's deputies, Long Beach Police, and others, are spending more than $4 million to keep you in office. These unions have a history of blocking every major police reform effort in the state. Let me say that again. These unions have a history of blocking every major police reform effort in the state. Why shouldn't voters be suspicious of where your loyalties lie? You have 90 seconds, and please focus on this question. We will go to Mr. Gascón's financial supporters in just a moment.
All right. So with regard to my support, I do have the support of law enforcement, but it's not what you think, Frank. Our cases are decided by prosecutors who are not the elected. In other words, they are decided by folks who are trial lawyers, who are trained, who work through the evidence and make decisions. And remember, it's about the law and the evidence. Look, my opponent was a police officer for 30 years. He was part of that union. He's getting $90,000 a year in pension from the different, from the police. When he was a police officer in LAPD, he went easy on police officers. Law enforcement is backing me, Frank, because they know I'm fair. I'm holding people accountable. I have prosecuted 200 officers. We filed cases on 200 officers. The truth of the matter is that with regard to Mr. Gascón, when you think about it, he had a closer relationship than I did with police because he was one of them. And the question needs to be, why don't they trust him? Why aren't they backing him? And it has to be because his relationship with him is poor, and it has more to do with he wouldn't work with him to help solve crime.
15 seconds.
A very difficult person to work with. And I have the respect because I've actually worked in the courtroom. I've actually done the work. I've actually done the trials. And so it's about fairness and what these men and women want to see in our community.
Mr. Gascón, a great deal of your financial support, upwards of $5 million, has come from just 8 individuals, none of whom live in LA County. How can you assure voters you'll be independent of these almost entirely liberal advocates for criminal justice, including George Soros? You have 90 seconds.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at my campaign and you look at the donations of my campaign, it's very grassroots. In fact, under $100. Now, myself, like Ms. Lacey, there's a lot of independent expenditures. The difference between those that are investing in my campaign independently and those that are hurt, police unions actually have a dog in the fight. They're there every day, they're defending their people. And the reason why they are going with Ms. Lacey is not because they like her or it's because they know that she will look the other way. And they know that I will not because I have a history of not looking the other way. The people that are placing money in my campaign are people that have been working in the space, trying to create safer communities for everyone, and I underline everyone, for years. And they care because they understand the import of this race. The work that has been done in this county, by the way, is costing taxpayers money throughout the state. LA County incarcerates people at 4 times the rate of San Francisco, and at higher levels is 70% of every other county in the state. The way that prisons are funded in California, they're funded by every single taxpayer. So the reality is that LA County's practices are being subsidized by other parts of the state, including the Bay Area, and people are fed up because not only are they not any safer for it, but we're spending money that should be going into education and social services and public health.
That's time, Mr. Gascón. We are running pretty tight on time here, so D.A. Lacey, very quickly, do you have any quick response to what Mr. Gascón said?
I do.
You try and keep it to 30 seconds, please.
Thank you. I will do my best.
Thank you.
In prior debates, I noticed that Mr. Gascón was looking at his phone, and I wondered, who is communicating with him? Who is texting him? Who is that? And that's the big question about, it's so symbolic, because that's the big question about the billionaires. What do these people want? Why do they want to experiment with LA County? They're not going to live. They're not going to live with the consequences. They'd like to experiment, and they'd like to put their guy in place to play with your
That's
state.
time, DA Lacey. Mr. Gascón, I guess really quick, is anyone feeding you information right now? You have 30 seconds.
I'm writing notes here, but Ms. Lacey has not 4, but 7 million reasons to look the other way, because she got about 4+ now and 2+ during the primaries. That is a reality.
All right.
All right, that's all the time we have for questions, and we move on now to a closing statement from each candidate. And we ask you specifically to spell out what's at stake in this election. We had a coin flip before the debate, and DA Lacey, you'll go first.
All right. Here's what's at stake. I believe in reform. Both of us are reformers. I've been a leader in mental health. There have been a lot of laws that we didn't talk about today that I have supported. But I'm a kid from the Crenshaw district, and I grew up here in Los Angeles. And I remember a time where crime was high. Crime rates are lower than they ever have been, but I would hate to see us go back to those days. When I was a kid growing up, I thought everyone had bars on their windows and doors, and it wasn't until I went away to college that I realized that's not true. Most of the people I encountered in my courtroom work, they looked like me. They were African-American. They did not have resources, or they were Latino and they did not have resources. It's important that you have a prosecutor who is invested in the community and not a politician who will say whatever he wants in order to get a vote. Everything that he has said, I can prove that he didn't do it in San Francisco, but now that he sees the job, he wants it and he'll say whatever he can to get it. I cannot be bought off. I will enforce the law. I have enforced the law. I've made decisions that may have been unpopular, but they've always been decisions that have been in the best interest of justice.
Thank you. Mr. Gascón.
You know, the reality is that we both come from very humble backgrounds. I grew up in Cudahy. Actually, I came from a family of factory workers. I slept on a couch in the living room. I was a rented couch. My family didn't even have money to buy their own furniture. So I know what it's like to be poor because I grew up here. I spent most of my life here. I spent 30 years in the LAPD. I worked through the ranks. I dealt with police corruption. I saw police corruption. I remember the Hollywood burglars. I remember the Rampart scandal because I worked to make sure that that did not happen again. You know, this November, we have a choice. It's both a national choice and our county. And it really matters about our lives. You can either go with the past, continue a system of discrimination, a lack of police accountability, and insecurity, and someone that is so conflicted by the money that she's taken by police unions, she can't even see a conflict when it's in front of her. But we can go into the 21st century when we go for hope, rehabilitation, rethinking our system, ending systemic racism, and creating a definition of safety where everyone has a place at the table. Look, I have been endorsed by the LA Times, by the Daily
15
News,
seconds.
by Mayor Garcetti, by 3 US senators, including Senator Harris. I have been endorsed by the LA County Democratic Party. I have been endorsed by Mayor Garcetti. The list of endorsers grows and grows, and it does because these are people that understand that I'm the one that can bring LA County into a different future. We should not continue to do business as we did in the past. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. That's it, folks. Thank you again to the candidates for taking part in tonight's debate, DA Jackie Lacey and Challenger George Gascón.
Thank you
both.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
On behalf of myself and co-moderator James Quealy of the Los Angeles Times, thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. I want to thank everyone at the Los Angeles Times and KPCC who worked so hard behind the scenes to pull this event together. Finally, mail-in ballots have gone out to every registered voter in California. October 19th is the last day to register to vote online. You can register in person up to and including Election Day, which is November 3rd. In-person voting begins at some voting centers on October 24th. Those locations can be found at our website, votergameplan.com. We hope this discussion tonight helped inform your vote. Thank you again, and good night.